So many questions for Niall Rogers. That is it for now. We're back with the latest after ITV News at 10. Coming up, Mary with the ITV Evening News, but from me and the rest of the London team, bye-bye.
Crackdown on asylum seekers, the government reveals new plans to reduce illegal immigration. For the first time, those applying to stay will be assessed on how they arrive in Britain. Critics say it's inhumane, but the Home Secretary is standing firm.
That's not acceptable at all to even say that, because the status quo is not an option when people are dying.
Also tonight, Britain and the EU move to defuse tensions over vaccines, promising to work together to secure fair supplies. Another blow to the high street. John Lewis is to close 8 more shops, putting 1,500 jobs at risk. And hearts breakers, how a team of part-timers pulled off a shock in the Scottish Cup.
Watching the ball hit the back of the net to make it 2-1, especially after just having conceded as well, was an amazing feeling.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The way people claim asylum in the UK is to be radically overhauled under plans set out by the government today. For the first time, those seeking refuge will be judged on how they arrive. People who come illegally would at best only get permission to stay temporarily. And that includes those crossing the Channel in small boats, something more than 8,000 people did last year. The Home Secretary Priti Patel said the policy will help those most in need and clamp down on people smugglers. But critics described it as inhumane, and there are questions over exactly how the government could deport failed applicants. Dan Rivers has the story.
So many migrants were rescued this afternoon in the Channel, there was barely room for them all in the Border Force patrol boat. The dinghy they'd started their journey on was recovered into Dover, evidence the government says of precisely why a tougher asylum system is now needed.
At the heart of our new plan for immigration is a simple principle: fairness. Access to UK's asylum system should be based on need, not the ability to pay people smugglers.
Anyone using an illegal route into the UK will only ever receive temporary permission to remain and will be regularly assessed for deportation. Age assessments will also be introduced to stop adults pretending to be children, and criminal gangs who organise illegal journeys could be sentenced to life. You only have to look at the number of seized dinghies in Dover to realise just how many have crossed the Channel recently. 8,000 last year alone. This is a pretty graphic illustration of the scale of the problem the government says it's trying to tackle. But campaigners say if these new rules come in, the people arriving in boats like this across the Channel won't give themselves up to the authorities. They'll simply disappear into a criminal underworld.
People will still try to come to the UK. They will still try to cross the Channel. They will still use the routes that are the only routes that are available to them at the moment. And when they do get to the UK, if they aren't able to access any benefits or anything like that, then they're going to go under the radar and they're going to be forced into some very unsafe situations.
Those who've already arrived and navigated the existing complex asylum system say it's already rigorous enough. Gulwali Pasale arrived when he was 13 and had to convince officials he was a child.
It's a very restrictive process. It's a very rigorous process. You know, it took me 5 years to get my refugee status, so it's not just like they don't give it to you so easily. And now they want to make it even more harder.
By threatening the rights of those who arrive in boats like this, some lawyers think the government's plans could breach the Geneva Convention.
To me, the proposals sound unlawful, unworkable and unfair, and I think fairness was intended to be central to the tenet of the whole proposal.
But the government insists its plans are legal and hope they will turn the tide of dangerous crossings over the Channel. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Dover.
Well, our political reporter Shihab Khan is at the Home Office for us tonight. So, Shihab, this is really quite an overhaul, isn't it, planned by the government? Is it actually feasible?
Yeah, well, there are some aspects of the proposals which will be fairly easy to implement, assuming it gets through the Commons, of course. And things like punishing those who are organising people smuggling with harsher sentences, that will be quite easy. But there are other aspects, like you heard in Dan's report there, which will be a lot more difficult to do. Things like treating those refugees who come to the UK using illegal routes differently to those who don't. Some experts are pointing out that you don't actually have to seek asylum in the first safe country you get to, but Home Office sources are telling me they've looked at the United Nations Refugees Charter. They think what they're doing is legal and just. On top of that, deportations. If someone crosses the Channel, can you deport them straight back to France? The simple answer to that question is no. Since we've left the European Union, there are no agreements in place. I asked the Home Secretary myself about this morning. She said discussions were ongoing with a number of countries across Europe to discuss these agreements. Now, we know these agreements can take a very long time and they can be rather difficult to do. So this could be something we're talking about for a long period of time.
OK, Shihab Khan outside the Home Office. Thank you. OK, well, let's move on now. And after the vaccine row threatened to escalate, the EU and the UK tonight said they want to create a win-win situation for everyone. In a joint statement, they said they would work together to increase supplies. But earlier, the European Commission had been proposing tough new rules which could impact vaccine exports to the UK. Here's our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks.
At this vaccine centre in Redditch, they can vaccinate at the rate of 1,000 people a day. But even before the current export row with the EU, supplies have been an issue.
This week we have done about 2,500, and we could possibly do another maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people if we had more supplies. Wow. So tomorrow we are closed because we haven't got enough supplies.
However, with the UK vaccination rate far outstripping that in Europe, the EU has come up with new proposals that could affect the export of vaccines from European countries to the UK.
If the country of destination, which has a large production capacity, restricts its own exports of vaccines or substances, either by law or by other means, it may be appropriate to consider whether exports to this country are justified.
The EU has already agreed to export 43 million doses of the vaccine to 33 countries. What these proposals could mean is that exports to countries with higher vaccination rates, like the UK, United States and Israel, that also limit their own exports of the vaccine, again the UK would be in that bracket, find their supplies from the EU are restricted.
Are we being greedy with our vaccine, Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister ill-advisedly told MPs yesterday greed was the reason for our successful vaccination programme. Today he was being much more diplomatic.
Vaccines, as you know, are the product of international cooperation. I don't think that blockades of either vaccines or of medicines, of ingredients for vaccines are sensible. And I think that the long-term damage done by blockades can be very considerable.
This evening, the EU and UK government released a joint statement saying, given our interdependencies, we're working on specific steps we can take to create a win-win situation and expand vaccine supply for all our citizens. A clear attempt to step back from the possibility of vaccine wars ahead of the virtual meeting of EU leaders tomorrow. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Well, let's speak to our Europe editor, James Mates, who's in Brussels tonight. So, James, things have moved on a bit already, haven't they, today? Does tonight's statement from the UK and the EU suggest that things might actually be resolved amicably?
Yeah, and I think it's a very big step in the right direction, and one that needed taking, because things were getting pretty nasty with that statement this morning that appeared really to be targeting the UK in terms of an export ban, probably going to be approved tomorrow night. It doesn't necessarily mean that the exports were going to be banned, but they gave themselves the powers to do it. I think the solution to this may be a stock of AstraZeneca vaccines that are being held in a factory in the Netherlands for various technical reasons, and they're likely to be redistributed differently, I would expect. But I mean, the atmosphere has been getting very nasty. There was a sort of a Keystone Cops type affair this morning in Italy, Italy, where the police there seized 30 million AstraZeneca doses, suggesting they were a secret hoard that were going to be shipped to the UK. In fact, it turned out most were going to the third world. And another extraordinary development today is that yesterday the German government imposed a total lockdown over Easter. Today they scrapped it. Angela Merkel said it was a mistake and she apologised for it. What that suggests is we're getting to a position where European governments facing rising caseloads cannot lock down any further politically. So no wonder they're jumpy about vaccines.
Yes, indeed. James, thank you very much from Brussels. Now, the most extensive research so far into so-called long COVID has shown 70% of those treated in hospital with the virus still hadn't fully recovered 5 months after being discharged. The UK-wide study found many continued to suffer both physically and mentally. And it said those effects were felt most severely by white women aged between 40 and 60 with underlying health conditions. Our health editor, Emily Morgan, reports.
And blow hard, and blow, 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 blow. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Push, 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 push.
Okay, a bit quicker again.
Can I ask how you feel?
Short breath and wobbly legs.
Researchers at Leicester University have been trying to find out why these women are still so ill after having COVID. You could say their results are groundbreaking.
Is this normal?
Yeah, it's quite a regular thing for a lot of the patients to feel like this afterwards.
Nikki, who came to hospital with the virus, finds the walk test at this long COVID clinic exhausting. The study found 70% of hospitalised patients haven't fully recovered after 5 months. It's been even longer for Nikki, who still suffers extreme tiredness and memory loss.
I was active. I was running around Mum's taxi service, looking after the house, doing meals, walking the dog, just general things. And that's something that I haven't done for a year.
OK, Sandra, so we're going to do a test that measures the strength of your hand grip.
After assessing 1,000 patients, scientists found long COVID affects more white, middle-aged women with underlying health conditions. They point out that's in direct contrast to the older men who have worse outcomes from COVID in hospital.
It may well be that it's due to differences in the immune response and then the inflammation that then occurs from the immune response. So what I mean by that is it might be that the response is worse in the acute setting in men, whereas it leads to a more chronic inflammatory response in women, leading to a higher likelihood of having long-term problems.
That's 1, 2.
I'm still getting pains in my back, swollen legs and feet, ankles.
Symptoms like Sandra's are vague and wide-ranging, making it hard to diagnose. Each patient has an average of 9 symptoms. The most common are muscle pain, fatigue and brain fog.
I do feel that I'm probably back to about 80% of my normal activities and fitness. I just want to get back to 100%. I'll do whatever they need to do to try and help to get over this horrible illness. Because it's a horrible illness, and I don't think some people just don't realise how poorly you can be with it.
There are now tens of thousands of people who might be daunted by their staircase at home. Nikki knows this is only the first step to understanding the illness, but it's a big step nonetheless. Emily Morgan, ITV News in Leicester.
Almost 1,500 jobs are at risk at John Lewis after it announced 8 of its stores will not reopen when COVID restrictions end. 4 of its at-home stores and 4 department stores are to close permanently, the largest of those in Peterborough. And our business editor, Joel Hills, is there tonight. So, Joel, what is then behind this decision?
Well, Mary, the company signalled this was coming, but the decision has left various communities in a state of shock. 400 people work at John Lewis in Peterborough. The department store behind me was refurbished recently at a cost of £21 million. So you can understand why tonight the leader of the City Council is saying this is an absolute disaster. Here, as elsewhere, John Lewis isn't just a big employer, it's also a reason to come into the city centre. Now, the reason the company's downsizing has more to do with the internet than it does the pandemic. Spending's everything's been moving online for years, but lockdown has accelerated that process. John Lewis assumes that between 60 and 70% of everything it sells will be online in future. It has more space than it needs, and it's shrinking its store portfolio. Not so long ago, of course, Mary, it was busy expanding. Between 2007 and 2017, John Lewis almost doubled in size. 23 stores were opened, even as online sales soared. The plan was to take on the likes of Debenhams and House of Fraser, but that bet has not paid off. And today, Debenhams has gone, House of Fraser is fading, and unfortunately, John Lewis is in retreat from places like this.
Joel Hills in Peterborough, thank you. Still to come, the ITV Evening News reunited the firefighter and the little boy he rescued from this burning house. And the bathroom birth that's given the Queen a 10th great-grandchild. But first, we heard earlier how COVID has impacted women's health. Well, now research carried out for ITV News throughout last year has revealed its financial effect too. It found that just 14% of women in lower paid or lower skilled jobs could work from home, and that's compared to 65% of those in higher paid roles. And they were also twice as likely to be furloughed. 34% had been by November, compared to just 16% of higher earners. 36% of lower paid or lower skilled women said they were experiencing psychological distress as a result. Juliet Bremner heard from some of them.
My depressive state got to the point where I couldn't cope anymore. I couldn't give my children what they needed.
The butterflies were there to know that I couldn't work from home. You have to be at work and you feel that you are trapped.
It was brutal, really uncomfortable, and there was sometimes I'd be crying at work because I was just so uncomfortable and stressed with dealing with it.
3 women speaking for all those on low wages in jobs considered low skilled who struggled to survive the impact of this pandemic.
Yeah. Yay.
Single mum Karen Brain's been trying to survive on 80% of her minimum wage. Furloughed from a sales job, she has less than £450 a month to support her daughter and 18-year-old son.
You're not getting the commission every month. It's the difference between putting food on the table and paying for your gas and electric.
In debt and feeling a failure, Karen ended up on medication for depression.
Some people might say you were lucky, you got furlough. How would you respond to that?
You're trying to make ends meet, you've been a single mum, you're working, you're paying your rent, you're like doing everything what you're supposed to be doing, and it's still not enough.
There you go, Dad. Sandwich for you.
At home, Rachel Goodwin has become the main carer for her 85-year-old dad. She has to juggle this with going to work in a supermarket as a low-paid key worker.
I've experienced stress that I've never experienced, and that I feel is because of taking on extra responsibilities with caring and helping out more with my dad. I've always been quite happy to walk into my workplace, but the physical act of doing so made me feel quite anxious and worried.
Graduate Kenya Scarlett was plunged into the gig economy. Work as a freelance radio and podcast producer dried up, and the only job she could find was as a courier.
People are just trying to survive, and one of the jobs that's needed at the minute is being a courier.
Despite getting the London living wage, there's no sick pay or holiday pay.
I kind of had a bit of a breakdown, you know. It was really difficult, like recognising that you're putting in all this effort and you're working so hard in all these conditions, and really it's kind of like, for what?
It's been a tough 12 months for everyone, but if you're in a job with low pay, few rights or little recognition, then it's been even more difficult. Juliet Bremner, ITV News. Parts of Liverpool City Council are to be overseen by government-appointed officials after a damning report into its management. It follows a police investigation which saw the then Mayor, Joe Anderson, arrested. Ben Chapman is in the city tonight. So, Ben, explain what's been going on there. What's happened?
Well, the City Council here has been under scrutiny since the police began investigating how building contracts were awarded. the report today was scathing about how Liverpool has been run in recent years. Among the many failures that it uncovered were dysfunctional management practices and the awarding of dubious contracts. There was a failure to correctly identify the value of land and assets, which meant that taxpayers lost out. There was a fundamental failure to understand basic standards of public service and an environment of intimidation at the council. A rotten culture was how the Community Secretary described it in the Commons today.
It paints a deeply concerning picture of mismanagement, the breakdown of scrutiny and accountability, a dysfunctional culture putting the spending of public funds at risk and undermining the city's economic development.
Well, he'd ordered this report after Liverpool's elected Mayor Joe Anderson was arrested in December along with 4 others on suspicion of bribery and witness intimidation. He denies any wrongdoing and that police investigation is continuing. As for this city, well, it now faces the indignity of having a Conservative government send in commissioners to run parts of a city council that has long been Labour controlled. Now, its leadership at Westminster today said that it was in favour of the plans, denying that this is a Tory takeover of this city.
OK, Ben Chapman in Liverpool, thank you. Now, authorities are working to move one of the world's largest container ships that's blocking Egypt's Suez Canal. The 220,000-tonne ship ran aground, causing a huge jam of vessels at either end of the vital route for international trade. 8 tugboats are working to free the vessel, and it's been partly refloated. Now, an off-duty firefighter has been praised for saving a young boy from his burning home. Ross Jones rushed to help when he heard about the fire in Birmingham, smashing a window and pulling 4-year-old John to safety. And today, the pair were reunited. Rebecca Barry reports.
I could hear screaming from inside the building.
A 4-year-old boy is trapped in a burning house.
I noticed a little bit of movement from the curtains downstairs.
As the boy's father struggled to get to him, nearby there just happened to be an off-duty firefighter.
I smashed the windows at the front with a rock that I found in the front garden and got him out of the window at the front. He was covered in soot from head to toe, a little bit of singed hair, obviously extremely scared.
But less than a week on, that little boy, John, is doing just what little boys are meant to do. Watched by the man that made this possible and his understandably emotional mum.
So much gratitude. It's unreal. That man, he's a hero.
Their home is now in ruins, but it could have been so much worse. Social distancing limits her actions, but not this mother's gratitude.
Thank you so much. If we could, I would give you the biggest hug ever to say thank you, because of you, I've got him.
I'm just glad that we can see John running around and the family's back together and everyone's safe. Yay!
Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
And the Queen's granddaughter, Zara Tindall, has given birth to a son, although, as her husband, Mike Tindall, described, the birth of their 3rd child was a little bit dramatic.
And then Sunday got even better because a little baby boy arrived at my house.
Oh, You're kidding!
Arrived very quickly, didn't make it to hospital, on the bathroom floor.
You're kidding me!
Shut up.
He wasn't kidding, though, you know. The former England star told his rugby podcast he had to rush to find a gym mat and towels. They have named the baby Lucas Philip Tindall. Buckingham Palace said the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were delighted and look forward to meeting their 10th great-grandchild. And finally, a classic cup mismatch with a fairy tale ending. Few gave the part-timers of Brora Rangers a chance against last year's finalists Hearts, but they pulled off one of the biggest shocks in Scottish Cup history last night. Today, though, as our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith reports, for the Giant Slayers, it was back to the day job.
The seaside village of Brora in the Highlands, population 2,000, and one small football club that just had its biggest result. Last night they took on the mighty Hearts in the Scottish Cup and somehow won.
Gone over, was Stewart, and fired down on the back post by Martin McLean. Would you believe it?
This was part-timers v professionals, villagers beating the club from the capital. But wild celebrations couldn't go on too late. They all had work in the morning. This is the manager's day job. At full time, he had to drive 4 hours from the stadium for his shift at Langfields.
No hangover for you this morning, Stephen, straight back to work?
No hangover, a bit of a reality check for me, getting home at 2:30 this morning, and then couldn't really sleep, obviously because of the result, and then up at 5:30 and into work.
There's a huge gap between yourselves and Hearts.
Hearts are a massive team, you know, arguably one of the biggest teams in Scotland. We're a part-time team from a small village in the Highlands that haven't played competitively since the first week in January, so we had no right whatsoever to win this game.
In Brora, locals were still wearing the team colours with pride today. But one fan was notable by her absence. Sheena, the club's tea lady for more than 50 years, passed away just over a week ago. She travelled to all the games home and away and died aged 89. The manager had a special message for her son today.
I had a little bit of a lump in my throat when I went through, and she's well missed. She's well missed, and she was definitely in her thoughts last night, that's for sure.
It all aligned, all the stars aligned last night, Stephen.
Dedicating the performance to her was the least that we could have done.
Against all odds, Brora Rangers march on in the Scottish Cup, with the village behind them and Sheena smiling down. Peter Smith, ITV News.
Yeah, Sheena fixed it, I reckon. That's it for now. Tom's here at 10:15. From me and all the team, stay safe and well. Bye-bye.